Hello everyone and welcome to this video, which is in our Great Engine Game series. I'm Grandmaster Matthew Sadler and we are looking at another game between Stockfish and Stockfish Classical from the TCC Blitz Gauntlet. Now this gauntlet also featured games between AlphaZero and Stockfish Classical, but I found the ones between the two Stockfishes to be the most intriguing. Leela was using ELO-based contempt, so was swapping its openings around quite a bit, whereas Stockfish was just playing the lines it considers best, as was Stockfish Classical. And what was really strange was that you saw lots of openings played that were played in AlphaZero Stockfish 8 games all those years ago. And the one that we're going to have a look at is an absolutely a really interesting game, but it features an opening that led to an absolutely gorgeous game between AlphaZero and Stockfish 8. And we see, this Stockfish Classical, much stronger than Stockfish 8, of course, varying and playing better. But it's really quite striking to see, and we'll look at a few other things as we go along. So let's start with how the game went. So this was Stockfish against Stockfish Classical with black. d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3. And now b6 from Stockfish Classical, which Stockfish 8 also played a lot. The interesting thing is that when black, Stockfish also plays the Ragazine, which was big favourite of AlphaZero. And the line that this Stockfish Classical plays is a line that was seen many times in various Stockfish 8 AlphaZero games. And it led to not very much at all then and not very much now. Actually, it must be said that there is some interesting play in this line. If you want to have a look for something, then do have a look at my channel. A video that I published in memoriam of the Scottish player Graham Morrison. So it featured a great game that he played with white against me, where he played the queen to e5 and then h5 and then g4 to g5, followed up with an exchange sacrifice. It was an absolutely incredible game, and he was overpressed really and lost the game in the end, but it was incredibly creative. But what happened in loads of those AlphaZero Stockfish 8 games, and now also in this, was this ending, which is really even, and just always leads to a draw between engines. But Stockfish Classical always had a fondness for the Queen's Indian, and the g3 line very much favoured by AlphaZero as well. And then what black often plays here, and this is a line I played a lot, is to play c6 and d5, which is really solid. But Stockfish Classical from time to time played this move d5, which leads to a more unbalanced pawn structure. In principle, it should be fine for black, but I always found them quite difficult to play. You know, these structures where you've played the pawn to b6. So if you go c6, then the pawn's a bit weak on the c file. If you play c5, you can get these hanging pawns, and these pawns on d5 and c5. For human players, very easy to lose anyway. But knight c3 played, castles, knight bd7, knight e5, and now bishop b7. And this is where AlphaZero, all those years ago, played a novelty. And it hasn't been played very much, just a couple of games since. Probably because black doesn't play this line very often. But AlphaZero used its rook's pawns and played the move a4. It was quite funny as well because around the same time a book came out on the Queen's Indian, and I think there were 6 or 7 possibilities looked at for white, but not this a4 move. And Stockfish, current Stockfish, plays it as well, which is quite funny really. Now, Stockfish against AlphaZero, Stockfish 8, played a number of things. It played the move c5, which it managed to hold the draw with, but it also played quite a lot of c6. And that's what Stockfish Classical, this version, plays in this game too. And it leads to a really nice concept here. And white plays the move a5. And then what's the point of c6? Just to take on e5 and go knight d7. You've supported the pawn on d5 with the pawn on c6. Looks a little bit ugly, but of course, if you play something like f4, we play the knight out probably to c5. We're threatening d4. You know, life looks pretty good for black, really. But what AlphaZero came up with all those years ago was something that it did quite a lot. Just a march of the rook's pawn to a6, but this time not aimed at the opponent's king. This is simply aimed at gaining time and giving the opponent something to deal with, whilst AlphaZero was building up the pressure on the king side. And Stockfish, it does exactly the same. So f4 here, knight to b8. Picking up that a pawn. I mean, the nice thing about the sacrifice is that black really does have to start, nibbling away at that pawn, because if you don't take it, you'll just never be able to develop your pieces properly. Black pieces are quite short of squares. Stuff like knight c5, you could get hit by b4 to b5, for example. So knight b8 played, and now a couple of lines. AlphaZero played a few games. King h1 sometimes, or the move f5 first. And then after knight takes a6, then king h1. And yeah, we are still following an AlphaZero Stockfish game. It's not in Game Changer. It is in the Silicon Road to Chess Improvement, which I analyse it there in great depth. And also, this is one of the games that we often showed. Natasha and I often showed when we went to chess clubs around England. Showing games from Game Changer, and trying to sort of get people interested in engine chess. And yeah, it was really interesting. I mean, quite a really unbalanced position here. I mean, the black has an extra pawn and a very harmonious pawn structure. White's a pawn down, and well, pretty rough, really. Looks pretty ugly. But obviously, white's gained a lot of tempi whilst black's been taking this this pawn. And well, a threat like f6 is in the air. There's also one very important thing, is that by playing this pawn up to a6, now that black's taken the pawn on a6, actually the a file has been opened up for the rook. So it's turned out it's lost a pawn, and it's cost a couple of tempi to move it to a6. But it's also developed a rook. The rook on a1, which hasn't moved, is suddenly developed, and well, you're going to see how powerful that rook is in the ensuing play. Now, not easy to get a grip of how you want to defend this, and Stockfish 8 did not get a good grip of it. It found an idea that's pretty similar to what the modern engines play, but it's just somehow falls against something quite extraordinary. I'll just show you that game first, and then you're going to see how Stockfish 11 improved on that. So Stockfish 8 played rook e8, AlphaZero played e4, and then after d4, knight e2, bishop b4 was played. Pretty interesting move from Stockfish. It's very typical defense. Stockfish always likes to somehow to defend in this way, keep its pawns intact, and then defend with minimal means. And what you're doing here, you're moving a bishop away from the king side. Looks a little bit odd, but yeah, you're simply confident that with your pawn structure intact, there's nothing that white can do against it. And meanwhile, you're just going to try and exchange off the dark squared bishops, and well, if white moves the bishop away, we'll have d3, d2, and sort of pin down the white position even further. And but here AlphaZero did something quite extraordinary, and there was just like a massive jump in evaluation. I mean, around here it was like 54, 56% expected score. After bishop b4 and the next couple of moves, it jumped to like 76%. And in the AlphaZero days, that was against this opponent, that was generally a sign that it was on the way to winning. Yeah, I mean, you can maybe pause the video if you haven't seen this game and try and work out what AlphaZero did. It's a lovely concept in actual fact. AlphaZero played the move e6, and after fe6, then f6, g takes f6, and knight f4. And Yeah, I thought I explained it quite neatly in Silicon Road to Chess Improvement. If you'll forgive me, blowing my own trumpet. It was just that what Stockfish was doing here really was it was saying, yeah, my pawn structure is fine, so I can I can withstand any blows, and then I'm happy to move my pieces away from the king side. I can just exchange everything, and you're not going to have anything at all. But after this double pawn sacrifice, then, that whole bit about my king side's intact is just completely wrong. The king side is sort of twisted out of shape. The pawn on f7 has been drawn to e6, the pawn on g7 to f6, and the king is open. And then all of a sudden, black really wishes that, Black hadn't moved the bishop away from the king side, that bishop was back on e7, for example. So just that double pawn sacrifice just really completely crosses Black's plan of king side intact, no worries moving the pieces away from the king side, and just, it's 3-pawn sacrifice, but it's an incredible initiative. And yeah, AlphaZero continued with knight f4, e5, and knight h5, hitting f6. And yeah, this is where the game got pretty interesting here. I mean, Stockfish 8 played the move bishop e7, simply giving up a piece in actual fact. Rook a6 was played. Obviously, bishop a6, queen g4 is very, very dangerous indeed. So it played king h8, and after rook a1 played a5, and just played with 3 pawns for the piece. Which was not very good, and AlphaZero just ended up Stockfish just ended up losing. And well, it took me quite a bit of analysis to understand, well, why did Stockfish 8 play bishop e7? Why didn't it just play a move like rook f8? But there are many beautiful variations here. So after rook f8, you play the move bishop h6. And of course, what you've really got, amongst everything, you've got threats of bishop f8 and knight takes f6. You've also got threats of rook takes a6. And in rook a6, there is an absolutely beautiful variation, which I'm going to give you a chance to solve. So bishop e7 was played, and in the good old days around Game Changer time, I was analysing this by myself a lot, and then just putting the ideas to the engines, because engines at the time, obviously they can calculate much better than me, but they really often needed a lot of prompting before they sort of were willing to look at AlphaZero's ideas, and then they started calculating more and more, and then they found the stuff somehow. But the idea I looked at first was to play the move rook a6, and I just saw this idea in a flash. It was so good. Bishop takes a6, queen g4 check, king f7, and now the move bishop h3. Now, unfortunately, this doesn't win. The idea is quite gorgeous. Maybe threatening queen e6 and knight g7 checkmate. Also, the bishop cutting across here and stopping the king from escaping. But I think there was a defense. I think queen d6 was a good defense here, and black was going to be okay. But have a look whether you can see what the win is after bishop takes f1, because I just saw it in a flash, and it just reminded me of yeah, I don't know, some of the most brilliant games you'll ever see somehow. So do take a little look and see how that works. I do remember at one of our talks, not many people solved it, I have to say, but there was one tiny little kid who solved it very, very well. I was very impressed. He couldn't have seen it anywhere. So queen g7 check, king e8, and now I'll just give you a moment somehow. Well, the gorgeous idea is the move queen g6 check. Oh, look at that one. So, yeah, if you go rook f7, obviously I go knight g7 check. And I think queen takes h7. I think this was the one. Simply, very, very good indeed for white, obviously. But after h takes g6, can you see the mate now? Ah, knight g7 check and bishop e6 checkmate. Oh, so gorgeous. So gorgeous. Unfortunately, that's not the best move. Yeah, the calculating monsters of the time, Stockfish, Komodo, thought the g4 was just completely winning, following up with g5. AlphaZero actually wanted to play bishop f8, queen f8, and just rook a2. activating the rook. You can see, I mean, we've already had rook a6 and now rook a2 over to f2. And this is also very, very strong indeed. Not totally winning for white, but pretty close there. But I mean, I was really struck somehow by, you give away a pawn in front of the rook and then you're just enabling it to get so much more mobility. Really, really nice. But that was the AlphaZero Stockfish game, which was, absolutely gorgeous there. But yeah, at the time, analyse with for Silicon Road to Chess Improvement, I think Stockfish and NUE had just come out, and the engines found a better line, and that's the line that Stockfish Classical played in this game, which is Bishop G5. And when you see what Stockfish Classical did, playing Bishop B4 to exchange off the dark squared bishops, then Bishop G5 makes a lot of sense. It's simply a lot more efficient way of exchanging off pieces than rook e8, d4, bishop b4. But that doesn't mean that it's easy. Now, when I analysed with my engines back at that time, they were looking mainly at e4, which was also what I looked at the most. Yeah, I was looking at this sort of line d4. And then I wanted to play knight a4 and try and do the same thing that AlphaZero did against Stockfish. But you're playing this with the knight on a4. It's less good than with the knight on e2. The knight's doing a lot less against the king side on a4 than on e2 heading for h5. But the idea of putting the bishop on g5 is if you go e4, d4, knight e2, we can play bishop e3, and you just sort of, you just hammer in a piece into white's position, and you just make it, just much more difficult to get free there. So quite a clever idea there. But yeah, I mean, I think that Komodo was looking at bishop f4, aiming to take back with a pawn f4 and then play e4 with this lovely box pawn structure. It was all quite dangerous for black. I was sort of thinking if I was a human, I wouldn't be completely comfortable really with it. But the engines were defending it fine. But actually, Stockfish found something very, very interesting. And again, I found it very thematic because it's making use of that rook that you've developed without doing anything at all. It's just rook a4. And the rook is heading over to the g4 square just to reinforce the white attack. Really very nice. I mean, the engines aren't very impressed with it, in all fairness. They don't think it's anything particularly special for white. But it is quite a nice idea. It would definitely shock any human player. So Stockfish Classical played knight c7. Generally good move. I mean, get the knight out of being attacked by a rook, and just consolidate here, and yeah, give yourself some support. But I mean, actually, the engines are already looking at the course of the game, which I think for a human player would be hard to imagine somehow. F6, this interesting game line, and I mean, when I saw it, I think I saw this game live. I was a little bit confused somehow. I mean, this looked quite ugly, really. I mean, you're allowing the pawn to e6. This bishop is, going to be removed, and white's going to come with e4. Just, it didn't look very nice at all. But of course, the engines had a pretty interesting idea here. g6 first of all, attacking the pawn on f5, so you want to get rid of that one. So white plays e4. What could be more natural? Just looks great, right? I mean, this pawn on e6, you're supporting this one. If d takes e4, we'll come around with something like knight e4 or take on g5. I mean, we've got lots of dangerous ideas here. But the clever idea is that when you play e4, this rook on g4 does not have any squares left. And so the Stockfish Classical's idea was to play d4, knight e2, and now the move knight takes e6. And after f takes e6, then bishop e6. And yep, that rook on g4 is trapped. So black is definitely going to get the rook, and he's got 3 pawns on top. So it's going to be rook and 3 pawns for 2 bishops. Now, the engines, certainly running on my hardware at my depth, they start off pretty optimistic. I mean, I think Torch is at about 0.7, always a bit more optimistic than Stockfish. Stockfish probably about 0.4, 0.5. But, gradually as time goes by, the engines just get less and less enthusiastic. And, all the games from here on ended up being a draw, just like it was in the gauntlet. So knight f4 takes, queen e8, h4 takes, bishop takes. And yeah, I mean, for a human player, it would be easy to lose it with both sides somehow, against an engine somehow. I mean, I do think that the threats feel, very, very dangerous for black. But on the other hand, if black gets organized and the pawns start marching and you don't really get any threats, then yeah, it can get quite unpleasant. I'll just go quickly through the moves of this game. You get a general idea. I mean, this move g5. I mean, this would be the last thing I would ever dream of somehow. Sort of moving the pawns in front of my king. I'd be trying to stay behind and then just advance my queenside pawn somehow. But yeah, Stockfish Classical, absolutely no fear here. King g7, getting out of the of bishop c4, rook d6. I mean, if you asked me to assess this, I'd probably say pretty close to a clear advantage for white somehow, but not really. So rook e5 played, and actually this is kind of the plan that black's quite willing to go for here. Always willing to give up a rook for the dark squared bishop and leave yourself with 3 pawns, but against this light squared bishop, which is hampered by pawns and doesn't cover any of the dark squares. And that, once you understand that, you understand this plan a little bit more, putting the pawns on the dark squares, restricting this dark squared bishop. And then the pawn chain, which is going on dark squares always, just to make sure this one doesn't get free. And it suddenly all makes a lot of sense. And, well, in this position, Stockfish Classical sacrificed the exchange there again to get that dark squared bishop. Looks a little bit dangerous for the black king, but the white king's open. And, well, the game was very, very long, but it ended up in one of those bishop and wrong-coloured rook's pawn against a lone king, which ended in a draw. The engine's obviously not playing with table bases, so, yeah, that takes a while for them to assess properly. But a really interesting game somehow, and I thought it was really striking to, come across so many games where you could see that Stockfish Classical, though much stronger than Stockfish 8, clearly had the same frame of mind, you could say, in terms of thinking about positions, openings that it wanted to play. And then quite striking to see Stockfish, the very latest Stockfish, taking up openings, that AlphaZero was playing. In particular, this very unusual move, A4, that's barely been played in human chess. And yeah, I'd only previously seen in games of AlphaZero, and coming up with this same brilliant pawn sacrifice on the queen side in order to speed up the attack on the king side. Really, really interesting, and yeah, I mean, big thanks to the TCC for running that gauntlet. That was really very, very interesting. I mean, also really interesting to see the difference in strength simply between this calculating monster that's Stockfish Classical, but with a handcrafted evaluation, just against this this incredible evaluation that Leela have, and also of course Stockfish now has, and just the difference that it makes. It really is night and day. And in certain positions, Stockfish Classical holds its own just amazingly, but yeah, in so many other positions, Stockfish and Leela are just a couple of steps ahead somehow positionally. So there we are. I hope you enjoyed that game. I'll put the link to the video on the Game Changer channel, just in case you want to have a look at that game in full. We'll do take a look at Silicon Road to Chess Improvement, where this game is analysed in detail as well. But otherwise, thanks very much for watching, and hope to see you at the next video. Thanks for watching.